Have you ever gazed into your kids' eyes and felt a crack forming deep inside them, even though they couldn't put a name to it? I'm Sarah, a single mom in my 40s, and I always believed I knew my son inside out. But one crisp fall evening, Ethan caught me off guard, saying, "Mom, can we talk, just you and me?" That moment swung open a door we'd both kept bolted shut for years. If you're a mom who's held it together so your child could let their guard down, stick with this story to the end. You might see a piece of yourself in it. Drop a comment if you feel like it, your words could spark healing for someone else. In the late afternoon, golden sunlight spilled into my cozy kitchen as I poured steaming water into an old porcelain teapot, its glaze faded from years of use. The soothing aroma of peppermint and chamomile swirled around me, mixing with the comfort of the wool shawl hugging my shoulders. Out on the porch, the last maple leaves of autumn fluttered to the wet ground, like the season was softly saying goodbye. This house has been our haven for over 12 years, since Ethan was a curious little boy asking about every wonder in the world. Now, it felt like a quiet anchor after some unspoken shift. The door gave a gentle creak as it opened. I turned to find Ethan standing at the kitchen's edge, dressed in a baggy gray hoodie, hair messy, his eyes carrying a depth I hadn't noticed before. He didn't say anything at first, just held my gaze for what felt like forever. I sensed a quiet storm brewing behind his eyes. "Can we have a private talk tonight?" he asked, his voice soft, like a breeze sneaking through a barely open window. I gave a small nod, keeping my expression steady even as my heart tightened. "Sure, honey, after we eat." Ethan flashed a faint smile before slipping away. Dinner that night was quiet, not strained, but like we were both bracing for something big. I cleared the dishes without a word, and Ethan pitched in without me asking. Then we settled into the living room, lit only by the warm glow of a corner lamp. I sank into my armchair, while Ethan sat across from me, cradling a mug of hot cocoa, turning it slowly in his hands. We sat in silence for a few minutes, but I didn't nudge him. I've learned to let quiet moments breathe. When Ethan finally spoke, his voice was so hushed it seemed he was afraid to hear himself. "I've been hiding things from you for a long time, scared you'd be let down." I didn't jump in right away. Instead, I reached out, gently resting my hand on his, the same hand that once felt so tiny in mine, now bigger, stronger, but shaking. "This is a safe place to be real," I whispered. "I'm all ears." Ethan lowered his head, the lamp's soft orange light tracing across his face. Outside, the wind picked up, stirring the leaves like the world was exhaling. In that instant, I realized the little boy I used to sing to sleep, the one I protected from playground bullies, had grown into a man carrying burdens I couldn't guess. But he was still my Ethan, and I'd listen just as I did when he let out his first wail as a newborn. That night, the autumn air felt quieter than ever, and a door in someone's heart eased open just a bit. After my soft words, a heavy silence settled back into the living room. The steady tick of the wall clock blended with the wind tapping at the wooden window frame, creating a rhythm that felt almost soothing. The amber light cast gentle shadows over Ethan's face, making him look both grown and like the little boy I used to know. I didn't rush him. I've learned that some truths only come when they're ready, like wildflowers waiting for the right moment to bloom in spring. Ethan sat there, hands gripped tightly, staring at the wooden floor like it held some secret code. "Mom," he said at last, his voice so low it seemed to rise from the deepest part of him. I tilted my head, my eyes softening. "I'm right here, honey," I said gently. Ethan swallowed hard, letting out a slow, shaky breath. I was terrified to come back home. It sounded simple, but those words made my hand tighten in my lap. I didn't ask why right off. Instead, I nodded, silently urging him to go on. "What made you feel that way, sweetheart?" Ethan managed a small, trembling smile, not from the chill in the air. "I was scared you'd ask things like, what went wrong at school, or why didn't you push harder? And I worried I wouldn't have answers that sounded mature enough." My heart ached as I looked at him, seeing echoes of my younger self, always trying to prove I was enough, forgetting it was okay to feel worn out. "You don't need to have all the answers," I said, my voice soft but steady. "Just share what you want, and I'll listen." Ethan gave a small nod, still avoiding my eyes. He leaned forward, his hands clasped so tightly they looked pale. College hasn't been what I thought it'd be, he said, his voice breaking like ripples across a still pond. Not the classes or the people, it's me. I'm struggling to figure out who I am, Mom. A sharp gust of wind rattled the porch, making the window shake. My heart trembled right along with it. Some mornings, Ethan would wake up in his dorm and feel like he was living a stranger's life. Everyone else seemed to have it figured out, heading for careers in medicine, tech, or finance, while he felt like he was just floating. There were nights he'd sit by his window, lost in thought, aching for something to feel real. A tear slipped onto my hand, and I wasn't sure if it was mine or just the weight of the moment spilling over. I didn't brush it away, I let it sink in, like a quiet truth. I thought about quitting, Ethan went on, not to run away, but because I felt so disconnected from everything. It was like I was just going through the motions, not really living. The room felt thick with emotion, like fog settling in the dark. I wanted to wrap my arms around him, but I knew the timing had to be right. Instead, I said, "Thank you for being brave enough to tell me." Ethan looked up, his eyes widening slightly. "It takes real courage to face that kind of emptiness," I added, "and I'm so proud of you for not turning away from it." Under the lamp's warm glow, Ethan gave a small nod, not bold but no longer shaky, like someone teetering on the brink of a deep feeling, finally ready to take a step toward the faint light of home waiting below. Right then, I knew my son's journey to heal wasn't starting out there at college or some distant place, it was beginning here, in the house where he grew up, on this quiet night, wrapped in soft light, with me, his mom, who'd always been there, ready to listen when he found the words. After I gently invited him to open up and he shared his first truth, the air in our living room changed just a bit. It wasn't heavy with tension anymore, but it wasn't exactly light either, like a shared breath held, waiting for understanding, not advice. Ethan eased back in his chair, staring at a blank spot on the ceiling, as if he was piecing together memories he'd buried for months. "Do you remember when I headed off to college?" he asked, his voice so soft it felt like it might break the stillness around us. "How could I forget?" I said, my eyes locked on his. "You gave me a quick hug and told me, 'I've got this.'" Ethan managed a faint smile, but it carried a hint of sadness. "I said that not because I was okay, but because I knew you had enough on your plate. I didn't want to add to your worries." My throat tightened, and my chest felt heavy. It hit me that my strength might have made it tougher for Ethan to feel safe showing his struggles. He went on, his voice steady but heavy with months of bottled-up feelings. "By the third month at school, I couldn't sleep. I kept it to myself, didn't tell a soul. When friends asked how I was, I'd just laugh it off. But every night, I'd lie there, my mind racing with thoughts like, is this major right for me? Why aren't I happy like everyone else seems to be? If I give up, who'll I let down?" And every morning, I'd put on a mask and act like everything was fine. He paused, swallowing hard. One night, I stood on my dorm balcony, staring out at the city lights, wondering where I really fit in. My hand flew to my chest, my heart skipping a beat. Ethan had never shared this kind of loneliness before, and now, sitting right across from me, was the boy who'd faced that emptiness all on his own. "I didn't do anything crazy," he hurried to say, sensing the worry in my eyes, but that feeling kept creeping back, like static buzzing in my head, making it hard to focus on anything. "I wrote you letters so many times, Mom, then ripped them up." His voice broke. "I was scared they'd make you sad. You're the strongest person I know, and I didn't want you to see me at my lowest." I didn't say anything right away. I just reached out, resting my hand softly on his, no grip, no shaking, just a steady touch. To Ethan, that small gesture felt like a balm. "Mom," he said after a pause, "some days I'd leave the dorm and just walk for hours, no plan, hoping to clear my head. But the more I walked, the more it felt like I was spinning in circles." He looked at me, his eyes red but no longer afraid. Then one day, I ended up at the bus station. I don't know why, but I got on the bus heading home. No call, no plan. I just needed to be with you. I pressed my lips together, the lamp's golden-orange glow catching every word like a soft sting against the armor I'd worn for years. "You haven't let anyone down, Ethan," I whispered. "You're just taking a longer road to find yourself, and I'm so proud you're figuring out how to come back to who you are." Ethan lowered his head, his shoulders trembling just a bit. No tears needed to spill. I knew my son, the one I used to hold in my arms, was starting to untangle his burdens. And I, with my quiet presence and open heart, was the safe place where he could do that. Outside, the wind carried the earthy smell of autumn leaves, but inside our little home, a new season was starting, one built on truths finally spoken and trust slowly pieced back together. After pouring out everything he'd been carrying, Ethan fell quiet. He leaned forward, hands clasped tight, as if he wasn't quite sure his words had landed without judgment. I stayed beside him, my hand still gently resting over his, not too firm, not pulling away, just there, like a steady anchor in a storm. In the soft amber light of the lamp, my face was thoughtful, my eyes on Ethan but also looking inward, seeing myself in a new light. "I was scared you'd think I was weak," Ethan said, like it was the last truth he needed to let out. "You've always been so strong, Mom. You never complained, never fell apart. I grew up with that picture of you, and I thought I had to be like that too, but I couldn't." My heart squeezed tight, like someone had wrapped a hand around it. I never realized that the strength I worked so hard to show, to shield my son from a tough world, had made him feel he couldn't be open with me. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice quiet but firm. Ethan looked up, surprised. "I'm sorry I made you think I couldn't be sad or didn't need anyone. Truth is, there were plenty of nights I cried quietly after you were asleep. I felt lost too, wondering if I was doing enough, doing it right. I just didn't want you to worry, so I kept it inside." Ethan stared at me, like he was seeing a different person, not the unbreakable mom he'd always pictured, but a woman with her own scars who still chose to stand strong for love. "Mom," his voice shook, "I should have called you. I should have said something sooner." "It's okay," I said, shaking my head gently, my eyes warm. "We all take our own time to name what hurts, and you picked the right moment." In that instant, the unseen wall between us melted away. No more roles of the mom who had to be unbreakable or the son who couldn't stumble, just two people sitting together, owning their scars, admitting they'd been tired, been lost, but had found their way back. Outside, the autumn wind swept over the porch, and dry leaves fell quietly. But inside our little room, something was taking root, born from honesty, tears, and respected silence, something called healing. And I knew, though the path ahead would be winding, Ethan wouldn't walk it alone anymore. He'd learned that being vulnerable isn't losing, and real strength sometimes starts with the courage to share the hardest truths. We sat there for ages, not saying a word, but the room felt different now. The heavy burden of things left unsaid had lifted, replaced by a quiet understanding, like two people standing at the edge of their past, looking back without fear of stumbling. I leaned a little to one side and opened my arms wide. "Come here, honey." Ethan paused, like some old instinct still urged him to hide his feelings. But then, under my steady, gentle gaze, he slowly rested his head on my shoulder. For the first time in years, he let himself sink into my embrace, not as a little kid needing shelter, but as my son, craving the simple warmth he'd always known. I held his shoulders tight, feeling his breath rise and fall near my collarbone. Ethan was shaking, not from the chill, but from finally letting go of all those days he'd spent holding himself together, the sleepless nights in his dorm where he never dared to cry out loud, the sadness he'd kept locked away, now melting into my arms. "You know, Mom," Ethan said, his voice rough, "some nights I'd stay awake, just wishing I could come home to smell that ginger tea you always brew, to hear your footsteps moving around the kitchen." I nodded gently, my hair brushing his forehead. "I missed you too, sweetheart, more than you can imagine." In that moment, we didn't need to be tough or play any roles, just a mom and her son, two tired souls finding each other in a hug. No advice, no big promises, just being there. The corner lamp's soft golden light filtered through the white curtains. Outside, the autumn breeze rustled the branches, and leaves twirled down onto the old tiled roof. The whole town seemed to be asleep, leaving this peaceful moment just for us. Ethan pressed his face deeper into my shoulder, whispering like he didn't want to disturb something holy. I don't need you to fix it all, Mom. I just need you here, like this. I'm here, I said, my voice low and steady. Just 3 words, but they were the lifeline that anchored Ethan when he'd once thought he was drifting too far to be found. I knew that night wouldn't wipe away all the pain Ethan had carried, but it was the first night he didn't face the darkness alone, a night when my arms were big enough to hold all the loneliness of a son who was still growing, still deserving of kindness. Ethan's shoulders eased, his breathing steadied. I ran my fingers gently through his hair, a familiar rhythm from his childhood, reminding him that no matter how much life changed, some things stayed constant, my love, my safe haven, and a single hug that could hold the whole world still. The next morning, soft autumn sunlight slipped through the thin white curtains, painting faint streaks across the wooden floor. I woke up later than usual, feeling a lightness in the air, like someone had flung open the windows and let the house's heaviness float away with the breeze. The smell of toasted bread drifted up from downstairs. I patted down barefoot, running my fingers through my messy hair. In the kitchen, Ethan was wrestling with the coffee maker, my apron tied loosely around him. On the table sat 2 plates of eggs, toast, and a few avocado slices, simple but warm and thoughtful. He turned and flashed a slightly shy smile. Hey, morning. I tried making breakfast today. I chuckled softly and pulled out a chair. Looks like someone grew up a bit overnight. Ethan set a coffee mug in front of me, his eyes shining with a clarity I hadn't seen in a while, like something inside him had been washed clean. I'm not sure I'm all okay yet, Mom, but now I know I'm not in this alone. Those words made me curl my fingers around the warm mug. I looked at my son, his familiar face now carrying the features of a young man. He wasn't the scared little boy who used to cling to me, or the teen hiding his struggles behind a calm mask. He was Ethan, still himself, but closer to his own truth. You don't need to be okay all at once, I said gently. It's enough to know you can take it slow, feel worn out, and lean on me when you need to. Ethan looked up, and his eyes no longer held the haze of sleepless nights, but the soft glow of morning light, clear and honest. Thanks, Mom, for not pressing me with questions, for not pushing me to explain everything. You just stayed. I smiled and reached out to lightly touch the back of his hand. Sometimes people don't need advice, just someone to sit with them, pour a cup of tea, and stay quiet. Breakfast went on in a comfortable silence. We didn't need many words, but every glance and small gesture was like a stitch pulling us closer together. I could feel it in the crisp toast, in the gentle clink of the spoon against my mug, something in Ethan was starting to mend. Outside, the autumn breeze drifted through the yard, and golden leaves fell steadily, blanketing the garden path. But this time I didn't feel a pang of sadness. Each leaf seemed to whisper that letting go makes room for new beginnings. And today, that new start had arrived, not loud or flashy, but soft, just enough to believe tomorrow could be brighter. We, mother and son, would face this season of falling leaves together, with steps that no longer felt aimless. That afternoon, the sun dipped early, casting a fragile gray-gold light over the back path behind the house, delicate as faded memories. Ethan and I walked slowly, the gravel crunching under our shoes, setting a quiet rhythm for a conversation still taking shape. Ethan spoke first. You know, Mom, I've been thinking about changing my major. I tilted my head toward him, my eyes soft with curiosity, but I held back from jumping in. The major I picked, software engineering, it's not what I'm passionate about. I went with it because I thought it'd guarantee a steady job, and I worried you'd be let down if I went for art instead. I gave a gentle smile, though my heart sank a little. Why would you think I'd be upset, honey? Ethan let out a deep sigh, like he'd been holding his breath for months. You've always worked so hard, Mom. You gave up your own dreams, your younger years, just to raise me. I thought if I chased something risky like art, it'd seem like I wasn't thankful. I stopped in my tracks. Next to us, an old maple tree dropped its leaves one by one, each one twirling in the breeze before settling on the ground. Sweetheart, I said gently, choosing my words with care, I didn't make sacrifices for myself. I did it because I love you, and all I've ever wanted is for you to live freely, without a heavy heart. Ethan stood still, his eyes rimming with tears. All this time, I'd been living like I had to prove something, like I had to be tough, never mess up. You know, I went on, what makes me proud isn't your grades or awards or scholarships. It's when you're real about how you feel, when you admit you're worn out, when you say you need a hug. The breeze swept by, carrying the fresh scent of wet earth and fallen leaves. Ethan looked down, picking up a bright red leaf, holding it like it was a piece of his childhood. Remember, he said, his voice shaky. On my first day of school, I bawled when you left me at the gate, but by noon, I acted like I was fine when you picked me up. I let out a quiet chuckle. You hugged me tight and said, it's okay to feel weak sometimes. Those words are still true for you, even now, I said. Ethan looked up, and when his eyes met mine, they weren't just a safe haven anymore, they were like a mirror, showing him who he was more clearly than ever. I think, he said softly, maybe I'll try learning again, but my way. Study what I want to know, move at my own speed, not someone else's. And I'll be right by your side, I replied, even if that speed's a little slow or a bit uneven. We kept walking along the path, leaves crunching underfoot. No more words were needed. Listening without judgment or pushing was the best gift I could give my son. By the time we got back to the porch, twilight had settled behind the hill. But inside Ethan and me, something had sparked, like a tiny candle flickering in the wind, just bright enough to guide us back to ourselves. The next morning, the sky was a soft gray, not too cold. I woke early, as always, brewed some chamomile tea, and sat by the window. Outside, a light mist hung over the quiet town, like a worn shawl, while inside, I felt a calm, like the peace that comes after a storm passes. Something new caught my eye on the dining table, a light brown envelope tucked carefully under my teacup. In Ethan's familiar handwriting, it read, "For Mom, my home no matter where I go." My hand shook a little as I opened it. Inside were heartfelt words, each one written with care and the love of a young heart learning to open up. I always thought I had to be someone you'd be proud of. I hid my confusion, my tiredness, the nights I couldn't sleep, because I didn't want you to worry. But that fear made me forget how to be open with you, the one person who's always held me without asking for anything but my truth. Last night was the first time I let it all out, not for forgiveness, but to find myself again through your eyes. Thank you for not cutting me off, for not judging, for not turning away. You just held me and let me breathe. I see now that the safest place isn't a classroom or a counselor's office, but our kitchen, with its tea-scented air and your familiar footsteps. It's your eyes looking at me like I've never been a burden. It's hearing, I love you, just for being you. The road ahead might still be bumpy, but I know this, I won't face it alone. I'll live, not to be perfect, but to be more honest with myself every day. Thank you, Mom, for being my safe place to come back to. Ethan. By the time I finished, tears had slipped down my cheeks, not from sadness, but from a deep gratitude. In that letter, I didn't just see my son growing, I saw myself too, the woman who'd walked through lonely years, now seen fully and loved without conditions. I slid the letter back under the teacup, resting my hand over it, wanting to hold its warmth a little longer. Outside, the first rays of sunlight began to pierce the thin clouds. Autumn leaves still fell across the garden, their colors vivid even in the season's final days. I knew winter was coming, but this time Ethan and I shared a new way of understanding each other, one built on hugs that didn't need words and a belief that being vulnerable could be one of the most beautiful parts of being human. When Ethan shuffled downstairs, still half asleep, I'd already set out 2 cups of tea. You write so beautifully, I said as he sat across from me, but don't make me wait for another letter just to get a hug. Ethan laughed, and for the first time in months, his smile felt whole. We didn't need to say much more. We sipped our tea in a quiet that felt just right, watching the sunlight spill through the window, trusting that healing isn't a solo journey as long as we could sit together and truly hear each other, like we did that night. Autumn, even in its late days, still had space for something new to grow. Some conversations feel like they come too late, but they land at just the right moment to save a bond that's been quietly fading. Ethan and I didn't have a big, dramatic scene or a flood of tears, but our story touches the deepest part of us, the need to be heard, seen, and loved without strings attached. If you're a mom who's tried to stay strong, or a kid who's hidden your struggles to spare your mom's feelings, hold on to this. You don't have to be okay to deserve love. Sometimes, a hug, a soft look, or a letter tucked under a teacup is enough to start a path toward healing that you don't have to walk alone. Thanks for sticking with our story to the end. If you've had moments like Ethan and me, or if you're on your own journey to reconnect, share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might just light a spark in someone else's heart.